Community on this slave community 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 slave, community slave, community slave, community slave, community slave, community on the site, giving their name, their first name, their age, their occupation on the site, and then their value. Here's the entry for Napoleon Drew, who is the one person with a headstone up in the slave cemetery, died in the 1920s. He's 11 years old in this inventory. I'm not, the thing that I want to have you focus on in looking at this inventory page is actually our fourth theme, which is the theme of community. And that is, if you start looking closely here, you find an incredibly structured, interested in how the resources of this place, how this building gets back toward being the center of a vital community that is of a scale like what was here in the mid-19th century. How do we get 200 people back onto the site? How do we get 750 people back onto the site, which was the number of people that were here when the schools were going full throttle? This site was able to support that number of people. These buildings and these landscapes were the essential core for the people assembled here. And right now, where we have people who I think that the four sisters living on this site have every bit as much tenacity and engagement and vitality as the 200 people that were here in the mid-19th century or the 750 people who were here at some point in the 20th century. But the real question is how to begin to construct a community again that has that kind of vitality and hub, the density, the specialization that you find, the complexity of the community that was assembled here. I think it's an aspiration well worth pursuing. Part of that is not only how there was a community assembled just among themselves, but the community that had vital links out to the rest of this community, this region. The Belmead store wasn't just for students to go down and shop in trade, or the families of staff and faculty. This was the store in this entire, it was a lot closer than going into Powden for doing your shopping and transactions. So this was actually a store that served the much broader area. And one of the things that we're interested in thinking about this as a community is how do you get back to this sense of tapping people from a much broader community than just were resident on this property to become vitally and centrally involved in this. The tailoring, the shoemaking, all of this was done in connection with servicing the broader community. The Belmead store was that institution. The question is, how do you move this site back to that kind of connection to the much broader community? Now, the store this was the Belmead store. But one of the things that we've found fascinating in looking at this 1930s trade school complex with the different trades, each having their own building here, upholstery, carpentry, electrical work, all specialized, is actually the way in which this building really captured physically, architecturally, that center of this much broader community. This happened to be the dedication day when the governor of Virginia came and helped cut the ribbon on this trade. But if you look at this space that was formed by those buildings, it's clear that this became every bit as urban, every bit as central and vital as what you'd see when you went to the court in Powhatan. This was really the center of a vital, far-flung community. And in fact, if you look down, this great image, the students love this image, because we even had the kind of parking that you'd expect when you go to the middle of some community. And so this tradition on this site is one that's particularly important. And again, not only the gathering of people from here, the women from St. Francis coming to St. Emma, there's that level of community here, but there's also the fact that St. Edward's was a parish, not just for the worship of the people on this site, but again for a much broader community. And we really want to begin to envision and think about how to get that kind of connection to the broader community restored and back on this site. The community of work well done, of learning on this site, the students building the dorm building that stood just out there is an important part of this. The social gathering is an important and vital part of this as well. The final theme is a theme related to adaptive reuse, to the way in which people find in a site resources that were put there from the past and have a great deal of relevance for the future. As you know, or as you probably realize, we're right here. When St. Emma settles on this site, they didn't say, oh, all of that stuff from the past doesn't really have a connection. We're just wanting 2,300 acres on the James River to build a school. There were two things that I think are absolutely central. One is they knew exactly what they were doing, and we haven't found the smoking gun on this yet. We haven't found the Colonel Morrell or Mother Catherine saying, the reason we ended up at Belmead is we wanted this incredibly powerful contrast between a site where African Americans were held as property and the power that would flow from understanding that that landscape had been adaptively reused to become two schools that would afford those same people, or the descendants of those people, a competence to hold property themselves. And we haven't, as I said, found a smoking gun, but every description of the schools from the early years make it very clear that this was a major antebellum plantation, that this was a place where African Americans were held as slaves, and that sin was in some ways being redressed by the work that was done